demonstration on the Learning Mastery Gradebook in Canvas. So Glenn, you have
Yeah,
the
have the
stage.
floor. Sure. My name is Glenn Pillsbury. I'm the instructional designer and Canvas administrator at CSU Stanislaus, and I've been working with our local group to implement outcomes, as many people in this group have been doing. And it came up in one of the last meetings a little while ago about the Learning Mastery Gradebook as a feature in Canvas, and so I thought I would just do a quick 10 minutes on that just to introduce it in case you haven't heard of that. Mute me. There we go. Okay. We're looking at my sample class here, and basically the Learning Mastery Gradebook is a feature that you can opt in or opt out depending on your Canvas administrator. It's one of the global Canvas features that they can turn on and turn off, etc. But in your own course, it's a course level thing. That's the first thing to know about the Learning Mastery Gradebook is it's a course level feature. And we go to feature options, and there's this option here for Learning Mastery Gradebook, and you can see that I have it enabled in my course. And again, your institution may have it enabled by default in all courses, or it may have it disabled by default and you opt into it. Then there's one other thing down here that says Student Learning Mastery Gradebook. It's important to understand that this is not the same thing as what I'm going to be talking about today. The Student Learning Mastery Gradebook is the ability for students to view the information in a Learning Mastery Gradebook, to give them that option. So there's kind of two settings, but the one that we're really going to be talking about today is the Learning Mastery Gradebook. That is for the instructors to use. And so this all starts with our friends in outcomes. So when I open up the outcomes for this course, you can see that I have a couple of outcome groups or folders that I've localized to this course. I've made some course outcomes, and in this course I have 6 modules, and I have a variety of module outcomes as well. And then you can see here I've imported 3 general education outcomes that are part of our university, and you can tell that I've imported them because the little icon has a little arrow pointing downward, like it's been in. So I used the find button here to navigate up the hierarchy of our outcomes and pull down these 3 outcomes because I'm going to use them in my course. And as we all know, we manage and connect outcomes to assignments via the rubric. So these are all of my rubrics. You can build rubrics for ahead of time, or you can build them in an actual assignment, but the rubric is still the mechanism to connect outcome to assignments. And so when I go to an assignment in my course, and I'll just look at this one here, you can see that I have built a rubric, and it can contain all kinds of things. This one doesn't have any extra criteria. All of the criteria in the rubric are built on outcomes. So these are things that I've then pulled in from my outcomes page in the course. And then when I open up SpeedGrader for this particular assignment, I have the rubric button over here on the right, and you can see how I've scored these students. This person did not do very well at all. So you just click, click, click to assign the score and click save. So that's how we then score or assess based on the outcomes. Now, if I look at grades, this is where the magic happens. So most of the time, when you come to your grades page, you'll arrive at something like this. This is what Canvas calls the traditional gradebook. But since I enabled Learning Mastery Gradebook in my course, I choose this. So it's just a different view, right? I can look at my course based on the points, or I can look at this Learning Mastery Gradebook view. And so this is a color-coded overview of each student in each outcome that's being used in the course, as well as a course average for each of the outcomes. So here the gradebook is broken down not by assignments, it's broken down by outcome. And in my assignments, I am reusing the same outcome in multiple assignments to generate this data. Sometimes for this module 1, it's only going to be in assignments that are related to module 1, and module 2 is only going to be related to module 2. But as you can see, I have a GE outcome here. This one I have attached to multiple assignments. And so when I say that the Learning Master Gradebook is about assessing outcomes, not assignments, this GE 1.2 is really cumulative across multiple assignments, because that's what I care about in the Learning Master Gradebook view. And I've got a few others here. And each outcome has its own mastery level. When you create an outcome, you create the scale of the exceeding mastery, the meeting mastery, and anything else. You can have a wide range of points along the scale. In my case, I've sort of kept it the default where the 3 is the indicator of mastery. And so what you're seeing here are how everyone stacks up relative to 3. You can see that it's doing the math for me. And the colors are set at, I believe they're set at the administrative level. They can definitely be set at the administrative level, but I'd have to double check to see if they can be set at a course level. In other words, to have a different scale. And so at the course level, we have this exceeds mastery being someone who's at a 5. You can see, for example, right here that student 4 is on this module 1 outcome. They've scored a 5 out of 3. And so that's why the square is blue. And so anything below a 5 is considered to be meeting mastery. And you could have, like I said, more divisions of your scale. So somewhere here is a 4.13 over 3, but they're still considered meeting mastery. But anything under 3 is going to be considered near mastery, even if it gets pretty close to 3. So I've got a few of those there, and then we've got instances where the student is well below mastery. And again, these are terminology that you can customize to your needs. One of the things that's come up in our recent discussions is having a level for like not applicable, or not, was absent or something like that. Some way of not scoring them as below mastery, but scoring it as not relevant. And so that's the kind of thing that you can customize. And then one of the cool things is I can, if I click on each of these over here on the right, I can turn them off. And so this now is only showing me the incidences of well below mastery. So I can filter things if I need to. I can also uncheck this box, and I can show, just for fun, all of the outcomes in the course that don't yet have any data associated with them, if I need to see that. But I'm going to turn that back on. And so here I can just really filter my view and see, which outcomes people are doing well on, or which outcomes the class is, might be really struggling with. Now, one of the cool things. So was there a question? Oh, I can't see any hands raised, so Michelle, please feel free to moderate for me. One of the really
I
cool
will.
things, yeah, one of the really cool things about the Learning Master Gradebook is, and you've probably seen this as I'm hovering, it actually will do the graph that a lot of us have been stressing about. How do we put it into Power BI and all of this stuff? And I'm still learning that myself. But it will give you a nice chart for each of the outcomes. You just hover over it. If that's valuable. And again, on this one, you can see at the bottom it says calculation method 65 over 35 weighted average, right? So that's the method that you have set when you created the outcome itself. How is it going to be calculated? And this weighted average is the default, and it seems like it's a recommended one, but it'll show you whatever you chose. So so you get these graphs at the course level using the Learning Mastery Gradebook. And again, you can filter it down by sections. You can hide the things to give yourself more room. You can, across the top here, so right now in this outcome, differentiate genres. The class is 2.42 over 3, but in this one, analyze techniques and values, they're 3.34 over 3. So I get at a glance, I get this view. All right. Are there any questions about this at the moment? Anything you want to look over it again?
Glenn, I have a couple questions.
Yes, please.
It's Sarah. Yeah, it's Sarah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this can apply to course level outcomes as well as institutional level outcomes, correct?
As long as so it's a course level feature. And so
Right.
it will do any outcome that is in the course.
Okay.
So your
Okay.
course outcomes can be your local outcomes, or you can have imported institutional outcomes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Such
And then,
as your gen ed, like
yeah,
all our
exactly right,
faculty would
right.
be. Okay.
Or
Okay.
if your department has outcomes or any outcome that is in this course is available to be scored, right? And if it's
Okay. Yeah.
available to be scored, then it's available to be viewed in a Learning Master Gradebook. It doesn't matter where it comes from. That's a
Right.
different thing.
Okay. But it does rely on faculty to import anything that they have not established themselves. Okay, so that
Yes.
was my first question.
Yeah.
Second question is the point system that you have here. This is what this is what is customizable, right? So my
It's
rubric scoring might be a little bit different than
mhm,
yours. Yeah,
mhm,
okay,
yeah. When you build an outcome, you get to decide what the scoring system is.
exactly.
And
Okay,
I didn't really spend much time thinking about that, but you can definitely play around with that. So
yeah, okay, okay.
great. Leanne, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, so you have some GE outcomes that you're looking at. How would you export those to be combined with other courses that are assessing the same GE? I don't even know if my question's making sense, but I'm hoping it does.
Yes, it makes complete sense. So in that case, that's a function of whoever has the outcomes role in your institution. They can run a report that will gather all the instances of, for example, GE 1.2 across all the courses. So that's not a course level report. That is an institution or a sub-account level report. So that's a kind of a different topic. It's related, but it's done differently. It's not done within the course. Now I can export. I do have this little export button here. To export the report from my class, but that's not the same thing as the institution or the sub-account level reporting. So all we're doing in the course is we're generating the data that then gets exported at the account level or the institution level. Does that make sense?
Yes, and then is that institution level and that is still in Canvas, just it's somebody else's.
Yeah, so usually, usually institutions will assign a user to have the role of outcomes reporting, and they can go into the sub account and run those reports. And it's just a giant Excel spreadsheet. That's all it is at the moment. You have to put it into some other program to make it visual, but it's a separate role within Canvas to generate that report.
Thank you.
Glenn, related to that question before, I see the other hands too, but there in the chat, somebody, you pointed out where that export report is for the course level. They were asking if you could export it so we could see what it looks like.
Yeah.
Is
Hold on.
okay, before we,
Yeah,
just to see it, and then
Yep,
maybe.
let me just.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no
Since you
problem.
went there anyways, and
Yeah,
we were
exactly.
naturally.
Here, so this is what it looks like. So this is basically the report that you're going to get when you do the institution-wide. This is the same format. It just has all of the. It's really just a spreadsheet of what you were looking at with all the colors. So it's slightly different than the report you'd get institution-wide, because here it's based on the students. Each student has a row, whereas the institution-wide is I have to, well, maybe it does have every student and every outcome.
Yeah,
But
it does. And then
This
you
is more
filter.
cumulative. Yeah, this is cumulative of this one course. So it's not really, it's a different way of organizing things, I suppose. So,
Sarah, did you want to say more about the institutional, just for folks' benefit of how it, or?
So you do
Highlights.
have, on the left, it looks pretty much, the institutional report looks exactly like this, pretty much.
Yeah.
It has all the students listed down the left side. And then, because I'm the one that runs those reports, and then we just filter out for the individual outcomes. So we collect all of that for all faculty who have assessed outcomes in Canvas.
Yeah.
Does it have the course in there too, or do you have to?
Yes.
Yes, it does. So you'll have
Yeah.
that
And the
piece where you.
assignment.
Great.
The institutional one also has the assignment as well, that this doesn't have.
Right. And that's why this is really kind of just a spreadsheet view of the colored squares in a lot of ways. Okay. All right. Yeah. Who's next?
You
Yes.
showed us when we're talking now, kind of looking at the results, and so you exported the data and it came into a spreadsheet. Is there a way to capture the charts? It looked like they were all pie charts.
No. It's just a user interface thing that is. I mean, you could maybe take a screenshot if I like hover over this and take a screenshot of it. But it's the whole question of data visualization is a whole other issue that this group is working through, and there's solutions out there, Power BI, etc. It's part 2 of the process.
And
The Learning Mastery Gradebook kind of gives you a hint of the pie chart stuff, but it does not. Canvas does not have a way to let you construct your own visualization, other than just collating all the data. Let's see. Jay, you got your hand up too?
Actually, Jarek was before me.
Okay, sorry.
I can wait. No, not a problem.
Please.
Glenn, just before we go so far ahead, these are great questions and great discussions. So thank you again for bringing this topic to us. I just would like to. Could you very quickly show us how you got to this screen? I realize that this session is going to be recorded, but I tell you, I thought I was paying attention, and you just lost me at some point.
Yes.
For the benefit of the group, if you don't mind, I know for you it's
sure.
obvious.
Yeah, and I wasn't as clear as it could have been. So when you usually arrive at your gradebook, you have all the grades and all the columns. There's this menu here that says Gradebook, and it lets you choose what your view is going to be. And when I enabled Learning Mastery Gradebook in the course features, I then got this option here. So it's this gradebook drop-down menu lets you switch back and forth between the Learning Mastery Gradebook and the traditional gradebook. And you're
That's
always
right.
going to have this individual gradebook. That's just part of how gradebook works. But once you enable Learning Mastery Gradebook, then you switch to it. And again, it's just a view. It's not anything more than that. So
Right. And where do
that's
you
how you
set up
got
the,
it.
where do you set up the outcomes, if you don't mind? Because that's going to address the question of, those
Oh, well,
course versus program versus institution. Right.
Yeah, that's down here, this outcomes area.
Perfect.
This is where you build them all, and then you import them into rubrics and assign them into assignments.
That's what you started with. Super. Thank you very much.
Who else? Jake?
I'll ask my question. Hi Glenn, by the way. Good morning. I feel like I should know this question. But so we were talking about how the GE outcomes a report can be run by, so the institutional assessment person. But what about where do program learning outcomes come in? Is that a report that is also done at the institutional level, or does that vary by institution? Like how are those done?
So that's a
little bit lower level. Yeah.
Sure. So you can definitely have in every so your courses are typically organized into sub accounts based on departments, etc. And each of those sub accounts has its own outcomes area. And so you could put the outcomes in directly into the sub accounts. One other suggestion I saw the last time was still having everything up at the top level, the institutional, but with having a sort of outcome group. That's what this button is, and makes a folder. So at the top of your institutional level, you could have a bunch of groups that would be for each of the departments. In other words, the outcomes themselves would not live at the sub account level. They would live all the way at the top of the institution. One of the advantages of that is that at least I think, is it might be easier for everybody to find the outcomes. If you have the outcomes stored at the sub account level, I, as a music faculty or English faculty, could only see the outcomes for the music department or the English department, but I can see all the way up to the institutional ones. I couldn't see the biology outcome levels or outcomes if they're stored at the sub-account level. If I store them instead all the way at the top at the institution level, so all the program outcomes way up at the top, I, as a music faculty, could, in theory, peer into and maybe accidentally import an outcome from the biology department because I see it. I can see it. But if you store them at the sub-account level, you can only see the ones in your department for that course on up. It doesn't allow you to go lateral. If they're all at the institutional level, you can kind of delve into all the folders that you can see.
That's another consideration,
yeah.
though. I think for the gen ed, that makes sense. But what you need to consider is pulling the data. How are you going to distinguish when you get the data and the raw data from the system? So, for example, programs like engineering majors, they share outcomes. So there's the thought of, well, I'm going to put them at the school level because they're sharing outcomes and we can just bring them in. The problem with that is then it makes it more difficult to try to distinguish this program and how they did with the outcome versus a different engineering program and how they did with the outcome. So you really need to think about not just the structure of your institution, but you need to think about how you're going to have to represent that data, the results, and how you're going to distinguish, do you need to distinguish the results of that outcome based on program or some other category? And if so, how are you going to do that?
Right. Yeah. And that's really well put. Yeah. You really have to think about where you put them, because there's pros and cons to each of the options.
And I just want to remind everyone, or for some folks that might be new. So we did go over a lot of these. We have 2 different recorded presentations on setup on very many of these different issues. One by Sarah and one by our colleague at Long Beach City College. And both those recordings and the materials that support those are on the website. I just put in our new sub-page on the coach's website. Thank you, Jarek, for our group. The first 2 recordings and the materials there do go into a lot of this information about how to set it up in the different levels. So if you weren't with us then, or you haven't seen that, please definitely revisit those materials and those recordings, because I think it'll help a lot, depending on where you're at in the process.
Yeah.
And then does anyone want to add to that? Because there's a couple things in the chat, so I wanted to go to that as well next to add that to. Is that good? Okay, so then we also have a couple questions for you, Glenn. One, do all of your courses use the same scoring levels?
That's a good question. I'm not sure of that. I'm not necessarily involved at that point. I'm mostly involved with kind of doing it in Canvas, like what the actual Canvas mechanism is. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that though.
The person might meaning just you, like with your multiple courses too, I think.
Oh,
perhaps,
yeah,
potentially.
yeah, basically, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But I think, I don't know, someone else might be able to chime in on that idea. I feel like Sarah, maybe you've talked about that a little bit, about maybe different programs using different, right? Is there?
Yes. So our gen ed outcomes have a different scoring system, and that was all established by the faculty as a group through Faculty Senate. They decided what the rubric rating was going to be. And then with the specific program outcomes, there is a different scoring scale, I guess is the best way to put it. Now you can, when you set up a rubric, you can, like you said, Glenn, you can pull in any of the outcomes. But we have like liberal arts and social sciences. We have their program outcomes set up in a group. We have STEM program outcomes set up in a group. We have each program that we offer at Virginia Western Community College has a folder with its program outcomes that faculty then go in, and like you said, Glenn, they can see all the way down the list. They look for their school folder, open it up, look for their program, open it up, and then pull in their outcomes or import them basically.
Yeah.
And then even though the scoring systems are different, it was faculty who decided what looks like what.
Yeah.
Jen, that question came from you. Did that answer all the aspects of that question, or did you have a follow-up to give you an opportunity? She's still here. Okay, I'll assume that's silence. So yes. One other question here we got. If Learning Mastery Gradebook is used in a course, does that mean that outcomes data could not be collected at a sub-account or institutional level? I think we may have just answered this, did we?
Right. Yeah. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
Learning Mastery Gradebook is simply viewing the data. It's not restricting it. Yeah.
Right.
It's now only the outcomes that are available to the institution can be reported. My local course outcomes that you saw, the course outcomes and the modules outcomes, those are not part of the institutional data though. So that's the only thing to think about. It's not related to whether Learning Master Gradebook is used or not. It's what are the outcomes that are in the course. I just wanted to show really fast, since I talked briefly about the Student Learning Mastery Gradebook, just so you have this information. If I turn on student view in this course and I go to grades as a student, you'll not only see the sort of grades and the scores, but you have now this tab at the top as a student that says Learning Mastery, and here you can drill down, and again, it's broken down by outcomes essentially that are in the course. It doesn't show you the GE outcomes, anything that's kind of been imported, but I can break it down as a student, and I can see how well I am mastering these outcomes. And you can see it shows you that there are 6 alignments for this one, and these are where I've scored on whenever that outcome has been used in the course. I can drill down and see it. But again, this is the Student Learning Mastery view. It's a separate feature that you turn on in your course if you wish for students to see that.
So it didn't bring in the ones at like the sub-account level or the
GEs,
institution level?
right. So the Student Learning Mastery Gradebook does not. It's only course specific outcomes. It's not the other ones that. So for whatever reason that I don't know. Yeah, I mean that maybe and if someone else has an idea about why that's not visible to students. So, you had a question, Stephen?
Yeah, Glenn, thanks so much for this. And it relates to just this last point you made. What I'm thinking about is the issue of multi-section courses who may, instead of putting their course level outcomes in at the course level, actually do it at the institutional level and then import them in. It seems to me then that so say like you have a multi-section introductory course that have common outcomes for the course level, but instead of having each instructor put them in at the course level like you've done, they want to put them in a folder that can be imported. It seems to me then that those wouldn't show up for the student and the Learning Mastery Gradebook, if I understand what just happened. Is that correct, or is there a workaround for that?
That's a good question. I would imagine, yeah. So, but basically, and I don't have very much experience with the Student Learning Mastery Gradebook, but my speculation is that yes, anything that is imported, anything if the outcome has been imported using the Find button, it will not show up in the student view of the Learning Mastery Gradebook. So if you did want them to see, if you had, multiple courses using the same one, they would all have to import it as a course. They'd all have to bring it. They'd all,
You'd have to copy it, right? You can't
They'd
just
have to
import it.
copy
Yeah,
it.
You would.
you have to copy it.
Or you could probably use the import feature of the gradebook. So in other words, you would have a spreadsheet, a CSV file that you can construct that has your outcomes in it. And when you go, so I'll just show you really fast. When you go to outcomes, you have this button for import. This means give me a spreadsheet, and it's a CSV file. So in theory, rather than having to hand build every outcome for each of the sections, you could distribute to the faculty members who are teaching all the sections. Here is our outcomes CSV file. Put that in your course, and those will be treated, I'm almost positive, they will be treated as these sort of hand-coded outcomes. But now I'm thinking, I'm not so sure. I haven't.
Go ahead.
I'm not the expert on that. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, we also just we have a demonstration of that process as well that Stephen did recently for us, also on our website. You can go to that same link. Thank you, Stephen, about the import. And then I was just going to say the challenge where, right, because here we're talking about it functioning on 2 levels and for 2 purposes, right? Because if we want the students to be able to see it, you have to import them in there so they can see it. But yet, probably, to your point, Stephen, that there's probably a course coordinator and they want to aggregate all that across, let's say, 5-6 sections of Math 100 or whatever it is. So then do we do it at both? Like, is that how to accomplish that so that the student can see? So we do the links and we do the import, do you think? Maybe Sarah, you might be the one who could answer that. Would it work? I don't know.
Well, I mean, in my work with it, so if you establish an outcome at the course level and you have everybody who's teaching a section import it, and assess the rubric. It is not going to show up in the outcomes report that I run. It would have to be, for example, a faculty member would need to come to somebody like me and say, okay, here's what we want to do. We want this unique folder at the institutional level that has these in it. And then I would be able to get all of their section information together and send it to them. But, and this, when we first started doing this, this was one of the hiccups that occurred. That's what faculty were doing, where they'd get the list of outcomes and they'd say, okay, and they establish them as a course level outcome. Then I'm running reports saying, I don't see them, I don't see them, I don't see them, you know? So there are some very distinct differences. And I don't think, even if the original outcome is established in a course and it's sent out to other faculty to import into their courses, I don't think in fact, I know it won't, at an institutional level, it will not show up in the outcomes report.
But it should, at that course level, if it's been created, just that, it won't go anywhere
Just the
higher though,
course,
just
yeah.
that. Or the multiple section course level versus
Right.
individual course, but not anything higher, yeah.
Nope.
Thank you, that's helpful. Woo,
Correct.
that's tough. I saw a hand. Jen, did you get your answer? Or
Kind of. I was just curious because I would think at the institutional level we could just load that for them, so it'd already be there in their division in a structured way where we could pull that report, so we don't have to worry about it being at the course level, because it's my understanding that it won't report back at the institution, so it's kind of doing a disservice, but also it could create duplication and then inconsistencies in what's being reported by the faculty member, like what they see versus what we see at the institution level.
Yep, that's another thing to be cautious of. You can, if your faculty as a group say, yep, we want these outcomes put in the Canvas course shell, they're already there. And they don't have to do anything except assess. That's it. You got to have a good team that's doing all of that though, because that, you imagine how large your institutions are, and doing that for all those faculty, that is a very time-consuming endeavor. Not that it can't be done, it can, but it's a lot of work.
Sarah, did you want to chime in on something before we throw it to Jen? Or, because I know I kind of came in the middle. Oh, okay. Jen, you had a question.
Yeah, so basically I'm going to give you a little overview of what we think we're going to do, and then you can tell me if we're doing it right. For gen ed assessments, those we're going to put at the institution level or outcomes. Then for each different program or college, those we're putting at the sub-account level. And each college will have one person who has kind of a limited admin access where they can help put in and pull their sub-account reports. They can't pull the institution reports. I'm going to be doing that. But now we're getting into how do we actually get the data, because we don't want people just creating or trying to recreate all these outcomes. So in our world, biology has created a Canvas master course. They've got the sub-account outcomes. They've got 2 or 3 key assessments, and the outcomes are in that master course. Now, what we think we can do, what we've tried for one class, it seems to work so far, is then the assessment and the outcomes are then pulled in at the existing course level. I ran the report at the sub-account level and I saw the results. So does that sound like we're kind of doing that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I think right or wrong, I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think what you're doing sounds like it's working for your institution, and it's going to provide you the data at the levels that you need that data to be and to report on. But I don't think it's an issue, a question of right or wrong.
I think that there's another question we haven't asked yet in the chat, and I think it relates a bit to what you just said, Jen, and thanks for sharing that. So Tiffany asks, so can a student look at their performance by program outcomes in any view or any level. So, you know, we showed how the student can see their outcomes of just the course, but the program outcomes, a student doesn't have access to any of that, right? Yeah, Sarah, I see you saying no, right? No one's experienced that, right? Yeah.
Well, the only thing though is if the scoring is part of a rubric, I mean, the scoring is part, we're talking about scoring through rubrics. And for that assignment, the student will be able to see how they did for that outcome for that assignment. But it's not going to give you that page of the learning mastery that Glenn had showed us.
That's just when that one PLO is a row on the rubric that the faculty has brought in, like maybe they have their grading rows and then also the PLO, right? And the student would see that. Yeah, that makes sense. But would a student even know? I guess it depends on how you label it, if they would even know it's a program learning outcome, you know?
I take it back. They can see it.
Ooh.
Let me share again.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I need to.
You can still share, right? Oh,
Is he frozen?
I don't know.
Looks like he.
Did he
looks like
get
he's
frozen? Because it said he
That
wasn't.
would be really good if they can see, and I wouldn't understand why Canvas would have done it where you can't see anything beyond the course.
Sorry about that.
There
I
you
keep
are.
hitting the wrong button, but it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you?
I think I just redid it. Well, I just redid while you were sort of gone for a second. So, see if it works now.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it still says
No?
host disabled
Yeah,
participant.
you know,
you're in here twice, Glenn.
You've got
I
two
see you
windows.
twice.
Oh,
Wait,
I do?
Let me see if I can find maybe the second
kick
one
me
on
out?
the list. Let's
There we
see,
go.
Glenn. Now is it just one? Okay, let me try it again. 1 second. Okay. Okay, there you go. That should work. Yep.
Okay, all right.
Was
Here
the
we go.
trick.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem.
Here's where I found it. Down here at the bottom. So here's all of my module stuff, and here is the general course itself. So it's not the course outcomes, it's not the module outcomes, it's the ones that are at kind of the root level of the course. And you can see here that these are the GE ones. So the student does have access to being able to see their progress on a GE thing. So it's just a different view.
Mhm.
Great.
Good, that's good.
That's good. Cool. Any other questions from folks? No? Well, Glenn, we want to thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
both your willingness to present and presenting this. I think that this is all, I think this was a really good kind of deviation from what we've been talking about this semester, yet a very important component of Canvas outcomes. So thank you very much.